This shipping crate was full of bees, and I was called to give the bees a new home. The bees were using this hole in the shipping crate as the main entrance to their hive inside, and I could see a lot of fresh comb and even some freshly capped honey. The pale light yellow color of the comb told me that these bees had not been here too long, but all signs pointed to this being a really big hive and a healthy colony, so I was excited to get inside. So I gave the entrance a few cool puffs of smoke, and I also gave myself a bunch of smoke to cover up my scent. And now I was ready to meet the bees. So I climbed on the stack of shipping crates, and I carefully lifted the lid, and inside I found one of the most beautiful hives I had ever seen. These bees had been here for less than 6 weeks, but they had already built a masterpiece with everything they needed to survive. I wanted to just stay there all day and watch the bees. This is the kind of hive I dream about at night. But I knew that this hive would take me a couple hours to remove, so I set up my work area and the bees' new home, and I got to work. As I was cutting the first piece of comb, I misjudged how fragile and heavy it was, so the first piece fell to the ground. I got stung by a bee when I tried to catch the comb, so I removed the stinger from my skin and I quickly picked up the piece of comb. The wax was so soft and fresh, and it was a bit hard to work with, but I cut the comb down to fit it into frames of the new hive. The outermost pieces of comb were full of brood or baby bees, and preserving it is vital to the colony's success. Each piece of comb was a bit different, and I could tell by the way the bees built this hive that they had done so in the same order I was working my way through to remove it. There were only a few combs, but they were all large and full of baby bees, pollen, nectar, and honey. So I started cutting smaller pieces so that they would be easier to work with. And in all honesty, it really hurt my heart to dismantle all of the bees' hard work. But it was the right thing to do for the safety of the people who worked here and for the bees' safety. So as I cut through the comb, I thought about all the energy the bees put into building this hive, particularly the wax, which is the most expensive thing a colony can produce. A colony has to produce and consume about 8 pounds of honey to make just 1 pound of beeswax. And all of that honey was first gathered one drop at a time, and it carried the energy of tens of thousands of flowers and bees. And this hive was already full of capped honey, so I helped myself to a small bite, and it was fresh and warm and delicious. If I found comb with baby bees or pollen, I put it into frames of the new hive, but I put the pieces of comb full of nectar and honey into a feeder for the bees. This hive had a lot of uncapped nectar, which meant that it wasn't secure in the cells yet. So if I put those pieces into frames of the new hive, all the nectar would spill out, the bees would lose it, and it would also attract pests. So after cutting through most of the hive, I was down to what I thought were the last pieces, but the bees would prove me wrong. I still hadn't seen the queen yet, but most of the bees were moving off of the comb and into the shipping crate, so I thought that that was probably where the queen would be. At this point in the removal process, I was more concerned with preserving all of the bees' hard work and getting the bees into the new hive than finding the queen. But as I put the last pieces of comb into the new hive, there were a lot of bees festooning on the lid, so I started scooping them up with my hands, searching for the queen and putting the bees into the new hive. These bees were not stinging me at all, and they had an excellent disposition, and I was excited to give them a new home and a safe place to grow their colony and spread their genetics. So after I was done preserving all of the comb, it was time to get the bees into the new hive, and since I knew most of them were hiding in the shipping crate, that was my next stop. So I lifted the lid and I found a ton of bees on the underside of the lid, and it almost looked like they were making a map of the United States. But there were a few more pieces of comb inside the shipping crate, so I pulled them out and I made sure I had all of the comb out of the shipping crate, and I put everything into the new hive. And truth be told, I was a little sad there was no more hive for me to remove, but I was excited that it was time to get the bees into their new home. So I put the lid of the shipping crate where all the bees were gathered, as close to the new hive as possible. And I could tell by all the bees still on the lid that this is probably where the queen was, so I started to really search for her amongst the tens of thousands of bees. And it didn't take long, and in just a few minutes, I found her. I was so excited to finally meet the queen. She was really dark and beautiful, and she was being well cared for by her attendant bees circling around her. And finding the queen was going to make getting the bees into the new hive very easy. So I put the queen in a clip to keep her safe, and I was so happy to have her secure that I took a moment to really admire her. Then I put her into the new hive. After that, I used my smoker to herd the bees into the new hive. Since bees move away from smoke just like we do, and since their queen was in the new hive, they started to move right into their new home. I smoked the bees for probably 5 minutes or so, and they all started running toward the new hive. A lot of bees were gathering on the side of the hive, and even after giving them more smoke, they just wanted to stay on the outside of the hive. So this told me that they needed more room, so I added another box to their beehive. Then I just waited and watched for about 30 minutes as the bees settled into their new home. But soon I noticed the bees gathering on the bottom of the hive, so I started scooping them up with my hands. When bees are clumped together on the outside of a hive like this, we call it bearding. And when bees beard, they are trying to keep the inside of their hive from being too hot, humid, or crowded. So I waited until sundown for all the bees to get into the new hive. Then I loaded them into my truck and I took them home, and it was another great day of saving the bees.